And we're live. We're recording. Mary, how are you? It is good to see you. I've heard you, but welcome to the show. Tell us a little bit about who you are, your background. Folks see the title of what we're talking about. You see the comments below as far as the ticker. If you see this, comment your branch of service, the years that you serve. We want to have a conversation with you in the comment section. But Mary, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes, thank you so much for having me on the show today, DP. I'm Mary Kate Saliva, and I'm currently serving in the U.S. Army. I have about 11 years of total service and about 8 months until I transition off of active duty. And I am currently a trained volunteer ambassador for Shared Hope International and a volunteer for Vets to Industry as their senior executive director of marketing.
So you're active and you're involved in this. And what have you done in the military so far? As far as have you switched jobs or different things? What have been your MOSs?
Yes. So I was a 68 whiskey. I was an Army medic, a healthcare specialist. And then after recruiters came over and spoke to me, I learned about psychological operations. So now I'm currently a 37 Fox, a psychological operations service member.
Nothing like some fun psyops. And then you from there began. I'm assuming that kind of may have led a little bit into what we're talking about today, because it's like, wait a second, how does a medic get involved in some of this stuff? So I'm gonna assume that obviously being in psyops, there's psychological warfare, having exposure, understanding things that may be classified, not classified, and just what's kind of happening across the board. So understanding National Slavery Human Trafficking Prevention Month, how did that become part of your wheelhouse and Shared Hope International and those type of things that you're doing?
Yes, absolutely. It might seem strange. I've actually had a very unconventional career in the military, and actually, my story started out in graduate school as far as my work regarding human trafficking. I was studying for my master's degree in public administration at the University of Guam. I was also serving in the Guam Guard as well before I went on active duty. And when I was in the Guam Guard, Guam had its first known human trafficking case, the Blue House Lounge case, and I couldn't study it actively at the time in graduate school because it was still ongoing. However, I was so interested in the fact that it wasn't until 2009 that Guam had a law against human trafficking. So I learned that everything prior to that, a lot of times it was the victims that were getting punished for illegal immigration, prostitution, drug use. And so I was really wanting to know more about, wow, this is really happening. And how you just talked about saying the words, it's happening, that was actually our slogan, it's happening. So when I was a student, I decided to round up other students at the university in order to create signs saying it's happening. And we held them at the intersections on Guam outside of the naval base in the south. And there's also a large Air Force base, Anderson Air Force Base, in the northern half of the island, and one main road, Marine Corps Drive. And so we stood at the intersections. We invited politicians to come out with us, local nonprofits, and it was just a way for the community to come together, and people would stop at the light and say, well, what's happening? And it was
Which,
incredible
which,
because
by the way, I just have to say is smart as heck, because it's literally like you talk about marketing, right? It's like
yeah,
literally using marketing to be able to get people to respond. It's happening. It's like, wait, what's happening? What am I missing? Right?
yeah, it's like, why are all these people standing on the street? So, and then especially we try to hit rush hour, and because we have just one main road on the island with 100,000 people roughly on the island of Guam, the service members from the Navy and whatnot, and just locals in the community were like, what is going on? What's happening? And it was hitting the headlines as well because local law enforcement, a couple of bad apples were also involved in the force and coercion,
Right.
which is with regards to the human trafficking. So we really wanted to highlight that, yes, it is here on Guam and it's happening in the US. It's not just something that happens overseas. And so this was something, and then in the United States as a whole, we didn't have a law till 2000. So it's really been within our lifetime that this is occurring. And then fast forward to now, on active duty, when I was a medic up at Fort Detrick, Maryland, there was no human trafficking task force there. And so back in 2016, I volunteered, joined forces with the Frederick County Commission for Women, and we met in front of the city council, and we spoke about the need for a human trafficking task force, and it was approved. And so to this day, it's still going strong. And then came down to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and continued to try to bring training to service members about human trafficking. It is not something that is mandatory required, which is something why I've taken it upon myself to really try to find different avenues to bring local law enforcement or State Bureau investigation agents, special agents, or local nonprofits to come and speak about it, because they're in the trenches day in and day out.
And I think there's something you said, Mary, that I want to go back to, which is, so when I went to BNOC, right, in the military, one of my classmates for basic non-commissioned officer course was from Guam. And I distinctively, remember her kind of sharing with the class, just, serving in Guam. I think she was I believe she was in the Guam National Guard. And the things that she shared with us was, one, how small the island is, literally from one point to the other. So,
Yes.
At the point, that's one of the things that stood out, right? Like, literally, you could drive from one point to the other. It's literally just, a very small place. So everybody knows everybody. It's very kind of close-knit, which I think is something to highlight because of this aspect of the human trafficking. Because of the fact, like you said, that it's so small, which means that if it's happening here, literally the people doing it are literally right next to you. Right. So it's not like we're talking about the United States from New York to California. We're talking about a very small place, specifically that, like you said, it's here. Right. It's happening.
Yes.
And it's almost one of those things where it's like people are great and interested in finding out what's going on. But there's also those looking going, oh, crap, I'm the one doing, what I mean? Like, so how was that tension? Because I think it's just key to point that out because of how unique that, Guam is to be able to take that mission you took.
Yes, absolutely. The cultural aspect is huge, especially for such a small island as Guam is. At the time, I was aligning forces with the U.S. Attorney Alicia Limtiaco when she was in the seat as U.S. Attorney for Guam, and the Marianas and the Marianas Islands, which are also even smaller than Guam. And we really wanted to highlight that it was here because at the time there were roughly 100 or so massage parlors on Guam, and you as the listeners might wonder, well, like, why is that significant? But some of you may have heard that illicit massage parlors are used as a front and for human trafficking and illegal activity that's going on behind the scenes. So what we wanted to also bring awareness to is that as the buyers, you're contributing to the demand of human trafficking and the need for these people. So Guam has what we call the Cirujanos, which other cultures might know as like a witch doctor, a medicinal doctor. You can trade things for different herbs and natural remedies. And that's very important to our culture. And what we found was like local politicians were afraid that if we created a licensure agreement law, that would affect the Cirujanos and the culture that we had. So it was really difficult. The Guam Department of Labor, I remember like their hands were tied as regards to if you walked into a massage parlor, they could have some certificate saying that they were a legitimate establishment, but without that licensure agreement law, that would make it very difficult for them to prove that or do anything about that. So I think it really was important to say, well, why do we need 100 massage parlors for 100,000 people on this island?
And that's a good point because to add to that, I literally saw on I think it's This Is America or America with Lisa Ling. She literally just did a special on that exact same thing, as far as human trafficking and what the massage parlors in those places play into that industry. So she just did a highlight on that. So I think that's interesting because of the fact that it's bringing again more awareness, even on like the CNN level. That's a conversation that's happening at the moment there. So now transitioning a little bit into this year, I want to jump real quick because I think the title makes a lot of sense and I want to just touch on it. I I'm looking at Shared Hope International, combating human trafficking in and out of uniform. This is at sharedhope.org. But the key part here is in and out of uniform. Talk to me about a little bit about that, because again, we've kind of set the stage. We're talking about human trafficking. There's the massage parlor piece and all those other things, but now let's add the service component piece into it too.
Yes. And so, and you can see I'm there on the far right holding with the "It's Happening." This photo was actually taken on Guam, and there's some of the university students in that photograph. I do recollect a Navy sailor approaching me while I was on Guam, and we were going to the local Rotary Club speaking about this, and word was getting out that we were doing this and raising funds for a local nonprofit for survivors, which didn't exist at the time. And this Navy sailor was letting me know that she recalls when they pulled into port in Thailand that was just something that the guys wanted to do, was go to the red light district. And I think as service members, we deploy all around the world, not just the Middle East, but all over the place. And so we talk about, we look at pulp culture and military movies. It's just that you see the guys buying drinks for these attractive women, or going to the red light district almost like it's a tourist attraction to go to these. And when we think of some people, when they think of human trafficking, which is also known as modern day slavery, they're imagining that this woman is going to be bruised up or chained, or it's going to be obvious to them that she's a victim. But that's not always the case. So you could have the victims are of different ages, different races, come from different social classes, and they don't necessarily have to look the way that the movies are depicting them. And you could, in fact, when you're buying and paying for sex, that you could, in fact, be paying for a victim of human trafficking. And so that piece is what I really wanted to hone in on with the service members, not pointing fingers at anybody, but knowing that each of us can play our part, even though just the awareness factor is paramount. Educating yourselves on the local laws and policies. And we are bound by the Uniform Code of Military Justice to not participate in such acts. However, I still think that it's not, because it's not required training, it's not often discussed. It's not a topic that people are comfortable talking about, but I feel like we need to get comfortable talking about it, because it's happening outside of every military installation, outside just everywhere. And the numbers, it's really difficult to hone in the numbers, because law enforcement units will have known cases, but that keyword known, there's just so many unreported out there of both men and women. We talk about human trafficking. I was focusing in on sex trafficking. There is other forms of trafficking, such as labor trafficking, but I really wanted to hone in and educate the troops about sex trafficking in particular.
And I think that's a good point you brought up, because understanding what that is, right? We look at, again, National Slavery and Human Trafficking Prevention Month. Really, the biggest part there is having awareness. It's being able to talk about those things, because there's different types of trafficking and slavery taking place. Granted, you kind of, answer, you focus on the fact of what you kind of focused on in your efforts, but it's wide ranging, right? There is labor aspects. There's other forms of how this works. And many individuals may come, let's say, to this country, and then their travel is restricted. So to your point, it's not just someone physically being coerced or restrained, but you can literally hold somebody against their will, because you have their passport, or they came here with the expectation of doing some work, and all of a sudden they don't get that. So now they're financially, stuck or dependent on whoever brought them or sponsored them. And that creates the things that, we're talking about. You can see that in sex trafficking. You can see that in a variety of different ways, even down to the fact of myself, coming from a law enforcement background. Those are the things that, you're trained in, right? When you're traveling overseas and stuff, do you see someone who looks like, they're kind of bound to someone, right? You cannot leave the person you're with. You see them kind of sobbing, looking at, pictures of their family. And it's just like, so you can tell something's kind of off, and you see that in different ways manifesting. But specifically to this point, I think having awareness of people may not, again, it's not casting judgment, but awareness that you may not know that even if you, for example, are not aware of something, we can't help others as well. So someone seeing this or listening to this might say, well, I don't, support any of that stuff. That's fine. I don't care about that. Well, no, understanding this means you may know someone who does maybe, in confidence have shared with you saying, well, I do this or that, the third. And it's like, well, maybe no, because this is what's happening. And again, having conversation, breaking the stigma, I think does a huge service to help, combat this. But I think looking at, human trafficking and slavery, it happens in a variety of different ways. So having these conversations to really show that for many of them, it may be sex trafficking, it may be labor, it may be a variety of different things, but we have to talk about it. So my question,
and that's so interesting.
Yeah. No,
as because local. So Fort Bragg is interesting because we are one of the most populated, and one of the things that we had a local detective come in to Fort Bragg to talk to us about human trafficking a couple back in 2019, and he actually split the room in half with his hand and said, based on the data that I have, half of you in this room have paid for sex. He said 50 to 60% of the buyers are service members and DoD contractors, based on what his data, and this is in the Fayetteville Observer as well, was the one that pushed this information out. But that was just something that was so eye-opening to me, is that it's not required training to talk to our service members about this. But I just really wanted to hone on that message to those still in uniform, that we have the SHARP program. We talk about sexual harassment, sexual assault every year as mandated training. It costs us nothing to incorporate human trafficking training on top of that, if need be. And that's sort of how I looked at it, as an avenue of bringing in human trafficking training, is incorporating it with the SHARP program. Of course, these are separate entities that we need to talk about, but since it's already so much money is put into SHARP training every year, and I tell my soldiers that we can't assume everybody came from the same background. That's why we have to talk about it every single year. They're like, oh, not this training again. But the conversation needs to keep happening, because everybody comes from all different walks of life, and there's so many myths to debunk. And as much as we're putting out from legitimate organizations truthful information, you have people that equally putting out misinformation and to skew that.
and that really goes again, and after service, like we talked before, I went into law enforcement, moved into counterterrorism, and one of the things that's common here is information warfare to a degree, right? Psychological warfare.
Yes.
There's an aspect there. Like, people hear about that and they're thinking, it's classified. The fundamental truths are very kind of can be talked about, which is understanding that information restriction, disinformation, these things are actively things that in this field, whether it be counterterrorism, psyops, or so forth, or special operations, that's what you're combating against, right? The information that you may or may not know and whatnot. In the real world, it might seem redundant for some or repetitive, but if we don't have these conversations, again, the numbers sadly don't support the need. The same thing happens for military sexual trauma, right? We do not have accurate numbers because of the nature of, what victims have endured or gone through. To include the numbers that are completely, non-existent for men who have been victims of military sexual trauma. So there's so many things that are happening just like in that field. Added to this, like we mentioned, there are soldiers, Marines, sailors, airmen, and Coast Guardsmen and so forth that may be in places where they've facilitated or, inadvertently funded or fueled slavery or human trafficking in some shape, fashion, or form. Because again, right, you go to, Germany or you go to Amsterdam, right? It's like a touristy thing, right? You got to go to the red light district.
It
is. It's kind of it's a landmark thing. And granted, some places, have legalized and have moved to, combat that by legalization and so forth, which is a whole different conversation in and of itself. That's not the case everywhere, right? So if you're in Turkey or you're in Jordan or you're somewhere in the Middle East, trust me, there's, there's some of that going on there, right? Or like you mentioned in Guam in certain places, even in the United States especially. So all that to say that I think these are the type of things that really are helpful to speak about. But then my question to you now is, granted, you came into the job you came in, you went into PsyOps, you kind of got involved in this piece. For you personally, what has this meant? Because there's a key word in the page that we were at, and I'll go back.
Oh, sorry, I lost sound, JP.
There you go. Sorry. Going back to this one, there's something I wanted to call out specifically, which is you are a volunteer ambassador with Share Hope International. And I want just to pull that out because it's something that you obviously have kind of made it a mission to get involved and support. So now, we've identified and we're talking about the subject, but I want to dig a little deeper and ask you, for you, what does this mean? Because it's not just a class. It's not just going to maybe let's add this to Sharp or as PsyOps. You came across these things and it was something good to bring back to the fold. What has it meant for you personally? Because you don't just become a volunteer ambassador of an organization, do all these things that you're doing if it doesn't mean more to you. So, along the way, obviously, this has kind of become a mission of yours to spread information and talk about this. So I want to kind of ask you a little bit about, what really is some of the drive and passion behind you, because I want people to hear your words to understand also what's driving that for you.
Yes, absolutely. So one of the driving factors is the fact that I am in uniform. And those of us in uniform, as you know, not just being a veteran yourself, but also law enforcement, we're held to a higher standard, a certain level of trust from the community. And one of the things about the Blue House Lounge case that happened in Guam was the fact of seeing law enforcement officers being part of that case. And they were part of that force and coercion. And so the victims were absolutely terrified to even come forth. And one of the things I noticed as a PsyOper, when I look at analysis and data, we are lacking so much in that space regards to the military. And I remember talking to a very high senior leader in the military, and he told me that it was a case by case issue and not a Department of Defense wide issue. And I will never forget his words saying that, because he's a senior leader. And to think that, okay, well, if you have that mindset, then how are we going to instill any of that and really create a change? They say it takes three generations to really change a culture. And it's all about changing that mindset, changing the narrative. And so that's why I really wanted to join forces with and become a trained volunteer ambassador of Shared Hope International, who's again founded by former Congresswoman Linda Smith. She's got her hands, in different aspects with creating change with laws and policies, and she's been in this field for over 2 decades in this fight. Whereas, I'm just trying to do my small part, but I really wanted to hone in the fact that if you are a service member, just answer this question. Have you ever received trafficking in persons training while you've been in uniform? And if the answer is no, that you can absolutely do something about that. There are some states I know here outside of Fort Bragg, we have a unit that's a human trafficking unit that's devoted to in the trenches, day in and day out. These are the crimes that they serve with regards to human trafficking. The State Bureau of Investigation, it costs nothing to bring those agents in to come talk about it. Some of the local nonprofits will come in. They have connections with survivors. It's so important to bring the survivors to the table to have their voice as well. But I just noticed that in the space with regards to the military, the Department of Defense, we are our own separate beast, as I say, that we're our own little world. We have our own lingo, our language, and people don't want to talk about it. And even me as a woman, as a female service person, I just don't want to be the one that's going up there and saying, I didn't want to be the one saying, all of you men are buying sex. I know my audience, and I know that that's how my colleagues are going to listen. So I really was adamant about bringing in male speakers. I brought in male detectives. I bring in from the male perspective of what they see day in and day out in these trenches with these cases, having the hard facts. And that's what my piece is, the fact that I am serving to my left and right. These are my brothers and sisters at arms, and I want them to have that information, because it is so easy. If you look at, and with a law enforcement background may know it's about where that money's going to. You're not just buying sex. Like, where do you think that money is going to? That trafficker, what do you think that trafficker is going to do with those funds? And so I think of it as, especially when you're downrange, about the ammunition, the guns. What money are you thinking they're using to buy those things?
And it, like they say, you chase the money, follow the money, and that's what it'll take you somewhere. And these are the ways that you begin to slowly, again, these things are not going to eradicate or be done with overnight. Like you said, it takes time for the change to happen to a good degree. That said, if we can suffocate or at least bring attention to different pockets that are funding things, there's a bigger picture here. It is a known fact that a lot of human trafficking and sex trafficking does fund illegal activities. That in turn does fund rather terrorist organizations. It's a known fact. There's no ands about it in some shape, fashion, or form, whether that be what people perceive it to be or local factions in certain countries doing things internally. So, you have things in the Middle East, but you can also talk about what's happening in Africa. You can talk about Boko Haram. You can talk about all these other places where, again, people don't realize or put two and two together, but there is a link. And that's the part where, you start looking into counterterrorism or psyops, how those pieces are being put together, where you're like, okay, what does this thing here in, Reno, Nevada have to do with, what's happening right now in Syria? Like, there is a connection, but you don't see that this funds this. You know what I mean? So again, I just wanted to highlight that is the bigger macro picture, but going micro, awareness to this. It's not to be a blue falcon, but it's about bringing awareness to understand that more now than ever, given social media, given instant access connection, these things are fueling and funding things at a higher pace. So you're almost, especially as a service member, you're almost to a degree inadvertently, ignorant to it or whatever. Those activities, actions, and so forth indirectly are literally coming right back around and literally right in front of you if you're in a forward operating environment. Because that, like you said, right, where do you think ammo and all that stuff's happening from? And again, that's just one aspect of it. It's not all inclusive. Right. But the fact of the matter is, it's kind of one of those things where you sit there and you're like, man, how many IEDs is these folks can, would be surprised? Where's the fun come? So again, it's full circle, and when you look at it that way, you kind of go, well, that's kind of an oxymoron. You go on R&R, and then you're funding things, and then you go back to work and you deal with repercussions of it. But again, I think awareness and conversation is a huge piece. I want to bring up another effort that you all are supporting. Talk to me a little bit about what we're looking at here specifically for this event.
Yes, and before I can add one more piece. So you just brought up an important point about the overseas and the different countries. You can actually go to the U.S. State Department website, and they have what's called the tier system, and they give a report card to countries around the world. And if you're in tier 1, which the United States is, that means that we actually have laws in place against human trafficking, that we're actually doing efforts, we're prosecuting. We have resources available to survivors. And so it's important to look at that as well, because, especially if you're going downrange, is your country, where does that country fall into? Is it in tier 3 that they're not doing anything at all? And even tier 2, they might have a law, but they're not actually doing anything about it. They're not prosecuting anybody. So the tier systems are helpful with the U.S. State Department as well. So again, and it doesn't cost anything for us to spread awareness. And I just wanted to let my brothers and sisters at arms know that there's so much that you can do in that aspect. But yes, as far as resources, I am in general really passionate about bringing awareness to service members, because I really do believe knowledge is power, and I want to equip them with as much resources as possible. So you'll see here, Vets to Industry we just hit our 1-year anniversary. It was founded by Brian Arrington, he retired out of the U.S. Air Force, and he was so frustrated with the fact that he didn't know about a lot of these organizations. There's over 45,000 veteran service organizations out there offering services. And you have this beautiful dog, JP, that you said you got from a veteran organization as well.
Yes.
So there's so many resources. And Vets to Industry, as you can see here, you can search benefits. And when you can look up, like, for example, for me, I could look up women veterans, and it would show up nonprofits, veteran service organizations across the country that assist women veterans. And knowledge, under the knowledge tab, will be our newsletter and our blog. You can learn about, our newsletter will have resources and facts, tips for your military transition. Just wanted everyone to know that you're not alone, and I don't recommend trying to do your military transition alone. I am 8 months from leaving active duty service, and so I can tell you that I started at my 12-month mark, And I don't feel that that was nearly enough time for me to be ready for this transition, but it's full speed ahead. And Vets to Industry brought me on with open arms. I'm now the senior executive director of their marketing team, 100% volunteer. There's about 150 or more volunteers. Brian doesn't even pay himself.
Wow.
So we are an all volunteer force. We are passionate about bringing this information and resources to veterans. Every 3 weeks, we have a networking circuit event. January 30th is our next one. And then every 3 weeks, we have these networking events on Zoom to where we will bring in a guest speaker who will speak, and you can see our agenda there. It's usually 2 p.m. Eastern time. We also host events for military spouses, so definitely recommend following us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, and so you can hear about these events. But we bring hiring managers and recruiters from companies all across the United States to get face-to-face interaction in breakout sessions, about 10 people each, and you can actually ask them directly about how the interview process is, how the hiring process is, and learn about these resources.
So this is again a great resource, because even looking at it, right, each room will begin with intro, 30-second elevator speech, like just the skills and things that most folks wouldn't even think about, but being able to have that Q&A, have a keynote coming in and speaking about specific topics to be able to give back to the community and educate, I think by far is amazing. So these events happen at certain intervals, correct?
Yeah, so for the networking circuit events, these are every 3 weeks. Okay. But then we have our military spouse event coming up on February 6th. Okay. And Vets to Industry on Eventbrite is where you can register for free. These events are 100% free.
Okay. And then here, basically, a lot of the information at vets2industry.com has the information both for, again, blogs, newsletters, services. I literally was typing things in, so you can start seeing it, bookmarking information. So like you mentioned, if I were to come in here and type in women resources or service women action network, so forth, it'll start populating that. So those are things that can be broken down by categories. You can see where the information is at. So and again,
and for you, if you're a veteran service organization, if you know of one and they are not on the website, definitely reach out to one of the volunteers, and we can get you vetted and get you on that website, because we definitely we know that they're popping up all over the place, and we want our veterans and their families to have access. There's Brian right there.
Yeah, I see right here. What's it about?
Yeah, there he is.
That's awesome.
So. And there's our board of directors. So, and it's just so great, because with 8 months left on active duty, I have been able to hone in. When you think of PSYOP, you're like, how in the world am I going to translate that into the civilian world? Because you very well can't use the military lingo. So I had to get comfortable about talking myself, and coming from the special operations community, I didn't want my last name out there. I didn't want to have a picture of myself on there. But as soon as I put myself out there and I told a genuine, authentic story about myself on LinkedIn, I got so many connection requests, and the networking is key. The resume will only get you so far, but as you know, DP, it's really about the connections that you develop and relationships you build with people.
And I think that's powerful, because that kind of segues into the other point I wanted to hit on, which was your transition, right? So, this is a great cause, but there are those that may be watching who may also be in that window of ETSing or transitioning, or they're kind of on the fence of what they will do, or they may well have gotten out, but haven't done that. And something you said, which I can definitely relate to, speaking about what you've done, it's always OPSEC, right? Secret Squirrel, all that stuff. Especially if you come from the PSYOP or counterterrorism world, it's one of those things where we thrive in, the shadows, right? You don't talk about those type of things. It's classified, it's clearances. Got it, check, done. The day will come, though, where you're no longer in PSYOPs. The day comes when you move on to something else now. How does that relate? So I think even the benefit of vets2industry.com and, having that resource of folks to help you with the transition, I think has, obviously, as you mentioned, been helpful for you to kind of hone that message of, okay, you're not, sharing classified information, but as a person, you did something, and that skill set can be transferred somewhere else, but you have to understand how to tell that story, how to be able to carry that to the next thing. So for you, for example, doing that, like you shared a little bit earlier before we began. You have some good news also that kind of came down today as you're kind of plotting your transition into civilian life. So that's a good question. What are some things that we can expect to see from you as you move from service to the civilian world? Where are your targets at? What are you looking at doing?
Yes. Yes, the great news that I received this morning was that my Department of Defense Skill Bridge internship was approved. Now, I will note that it took a little bit longer than expected, and I think that's why it's so important to share this information with the leaders that are still in uniform, because the day is going to come where we're going to have to hang that uniform up. But we want to make sure that we're setting our soldiers, our sailors, airmen, coasties, that we're setting them up for success when they take that uniform off. And so we need to educate our leaders equally on these resources. And so I got the good news. So I will be interning with service to software with a company called Resupply for 6 months. And so you get this opportunity while you're still getting paid by the military to intern for a company on the outside to help, hone in and enhance your skills, those hard and soft skills, helping you translate those skills and giving you that experience to have a very smooth transition. We're definitely getting better with the military transition, but we still have a ways to go. But that educational piece about what you have options. You do not have to wait until your last day in uniform to make an impact now and take the reins on the next chapter of your life. And so I think and the other thing was actually this morning was such a great morning. Not only did I get that news, but I also participated in the Red Sand Project, which I wanted to give a shout out to, because that is a campaign. We're bringing awareness to human trafficking. It is free to get the sand, and it is environmentally friendly. You can go on the Red Sand Project and look them up, and you just have to pay for shipping, but they will send out the red sand to you, and you just put it in the cracks of sidewalks, and it's awareness campaign about human trafficking. So thank you. Yes, absolutely. That's there, and it's so great because you can come in with like packs of 50 in a package, and I did realize they ship to Guam too. So I'm excited to get my Rotary Club and other places around the world to participate in this.
Wow.
So we got to do that this morning, and that was incredible to do that.
And that's redsandproject.org, which I think is awesome because I've heard about it, but when we talked a little bit when you brought it up, I think it's just something good to share again of just the various things that are out there because for many folks, especially to your point, I think it goes without having to be said that
Lost the sound again, DP.
Oops, sorry about that. I think the work that you've done going from military serving, doing what you're doing, but also becoming a volunteer ambassador, the work that you've done with Vets to Industry, I think it just highlights, finding something that, aligns with your passion, something that gives you some purpose. Though you're serving, you have enough things to do, but yet you still made a point to kind of step up and do something. And obviously all those things have helped you as you're now transitioning. So for those that are out there, right, you may still be serving, but that doesn't stop you from, joining a movement or supporting something, right? In civilian world, folks will say, hey, you do your 9 to 5 and then you do your side hustle afterward. Right. And that's just one way of saying you don't like what you're doing 9 to 5, but at least you do a little passion, efforts, work, and so forth afterward. But the reality is, for many people, that comes in different ways. Some folks have to feel it gives them fulfillment to volunteer at certain organizations or do certain things to where it's great that you do the job that you do. But if you have the ability to get involved and mobilize and support and thrive, I think there's just something to be said because the skill sets that you have are key, obviously, in the success of things that, you've been able to bring to Vets to Industry, right? So you were able to literally almost get a side, hustle, but really more a passion project of being able to really support, gain skills from that, which inevitably
Yes.
obviously have led to your transition. But the other part too that you mentioned is it took longer than expected. Sometimes that happens, but the good thing is you didn't wait until the day after service to then start the process and then wait 8 months or a year because sometimes it could take that long.
Right, which is sort of what, was where Vets to Industry came to be, was because Brian didn't know about these resources when he was in his transition. And so he really wanted to make a virtual library to make it easier for service members. Includes caregivers, Blue and Gold Star families, military spouses, because it is not just a transition for the service member. This is included with your family. Don't
Yes.
forget about your spouse and your kids. And there's so many things that you can do when you're finding an organization that you can stand behind their mission, that you can include your spouse in that process and just make it a family thing. I used to coach, even when I was an Army medic, I coached after work Girls on the Run, which empowered third and fourth grade girls to, we taught them about self-esteem and anti-bullying, and just empowering these young girls in this next generation that they can do what they set their mind to do. I was joke that I'd rather, because I jump out of airplanes, and some days I'm like, oh, maybe I'd rather jump out of an airplane than do that, but than do the hard stuff. But it's just one of those things where you realize that when other people look at you, that you might not have the confidence that what you're doing is great, but when you see the next generation looking up to you, that's really powerful, that you do have that influence. It doesn't matter what rank you're at. You could be in E3, E4 getting out of service, and you can still have your own podcast. You can still become a volunteer ambassador. You can still make a huge impact.
I think there's a power to that too, because as we start to kind of package everything and everyone kind of sees what we've been able to cover here, it's that rewinding all of this, the only reason we're even having this conversation is through Clubhouse. It's literally through being sensitive to new technologies and platforms, and then not only being sensitive to them, but also making a point to stand up in those places and have conversations. And I think it's just the power of mobilizing no matter where we're at, whether you're doing it on a street corner, or you're doing it in a Zoom session with a summit, or whether you're doing it, let's say, in a Clubhouse app that's thriving. Like, the point is the message can't be contained. Whether you do it on YouTube or wherever, make a point to do that, because you'll make connections like this. And I think that's where the power comes into having these conversations, because like we talked about briefly, part of what this initiative is, it goes beyond just having one theme, right? The sound off concept, and the different things that we're spinning off. When I look at what Veterans Network is, it's really our network as a whole of understanding that there's a skill set you bring, and there's a skill set that I bring, and what, for example, Vets to Industry can do, it's amazing. And then ultimately, what can we do to support that, right? We can create a platform to talk about it, because someone that's watching this may well have came, to wherever you're watching this on our many different platforms because of somebody else's, story. Maybe you came because, we had a conversation with someone about, culinary things, right? And that's what, you're a culinary person, and you just happen to stick around, you find more content, and all of a sudden you're like, what's this married lady talking about? And next thing you know, we're having a conversation about slavery and human trafficking. And I think that's really what creating a platform that bridges all these different things, because what I've noticed in our veteran community and military community as a whole, but more so on this side, looking at it from the civilian side, it's that we know that there are things out there in many places, but where do we connect those things and help to push the word forward? Because if you're doing your job and you're doing your thing, it's hard to do all that, and then, all right, how do we go ahead and get the message out on broader platforms? So I say this to say that no matter what anyone is doing, if you have the ability to connect, that is where the power comes down to, right? You can do what you're doing, and if I can lend some more awareness and have a conversation, I think that in and of itself creates another pathway for someone to be able to educate themselves, to learn, and then in your mission, like you said from the very beginning, helping out a service member who just may not know. It's just like, hey, I get it. This is like amnesty hour. I don't care, what happened before. It's understand what this is fueling. Understand if we're going to have awareness of slavery and human trafficking, these are the things of how they manifest. So take the information back, take it to your unit, ask for these things. And if not, at least you make a point to have these conversations, because guess what? And I know how this usually works. It's we're on R&R, we're doing something, and you're like, Jim, don't do it. Like, literally, how many times have we literally pulled back one of our buddies or battle buddies from doing something dumb in some shape, fashion, or form. Like, you know what? It's time to wrap it up. You've had a little too much. We got to get out of here. And the
Right.
same way we don't leave anybody behind, it would be almost hypocritical to do the same thing with this. So if you
Absolutely.
have one of your, let's say battle buddies with you, and you go out and have a great time, and they have a little bit too much, you're not going to leave them, right? It's like, what's not safe, it's time to go, right? You leave no one behind, whether it be on the battlefield or outside or even beyond service. This information,
I got your six, right? I've got
exactly.
your
I got your six. And so this is exactly that. So I wanted to add that context because, again, someone can look at this same area, your blue falconing, and like, no, it's having your six because you don't understand the implications and ramifications of this, thing that people don't talk about. That's literally happening right now. Like it's happening literally in our time. So these conversations are needed to raise awareness, and it just helps to be able to take care of each other. Because you just don't know. Because the other side is what may happen in these circles where human trafficking and slavery may be happening, or sex trafficking is happening. You don't know, the environments that you're in. So the point I had is we would be doing a disservice to our brothers and sisters in arms, and those who may be hearing this. Again, it may not be you, but you know someone, and it literally might be enough to just give you enough awareness to say, hey, Jim, maybe not, I just saw this stuff. I don't think it's cool, man. This stuff's getting kind of out of hand. And pivot somewhere else, right? Do something different. So information, awareness, breaking stigmas, I think is what this is all about, having the hard conversations, because obviously people don't want to talk about it. They don't want to have it sharp because, like you said, take the Guam situation. Many folks that may be dismissing this may well be the ones that don't want this to be a thing, because they may be supporters of it, or they may be part of that. And that's just the reality of the world. So sometimes it's disheartening when you, for example, bring things to the awareness or attention of those in a position to hopefully make change, and they're very dismissive. And it's one of those, we're not there yet, but sadly, like the Guam situation, sometimes it just might be such a small community that the people that we're trying to bring awareness of something to are the ones that would like to have no awareness of it. And we cannot be ignorant to that fact as well. So we have to find different mechanisms and ways like this and others to have these conversations.
Absolutely. One of the first survivors that I ever worked with while I was a volunteer, she was actually born and raised in North Carolina, a white woman around the same age as me, and she was a mother. And just to look at her and sit at the table with her and hear her story, and it's as far as like what fuels me, that just fuels me even more, the fact that this is happening around us, and we can just go about our daily routines and not look at that and not address that. And the thing that is really difficult too is because we talked about numbers earlier, a lot of, especially when it comes to the military, our leaders, our decision makers, they want to see numbers, and without those numbers, you don't really it's like, well, it's not an issue.
Right,
You don't see those numbers.
it's like a catch
Yeah.
22.
There you go.
Decision makers
Yes.
don't want to make a decision without numbers. We can't get numbers unless we bring awareness.
Right, and then there might be a lack of laws or policies, and so those numbers aren't being noted. And with the military, if something happens on the civilian side and there's a service member involved, they get passed over to CID, and then it's left up to commanders to make a decision. Well, if the commanders don't push forward to get that service member prosecuted or anything, that it doesn't go down as a case, even though they were involved. They may have made a full confession, and then they were warned. It's so many different layers to it. But when it's left up to our decision makers, but the decision makers themselves aren't educated on it, like you said, we're just in this circle. This endless wheel is not really going anywhere. And so that's why the awareness piece is so paramount. And we can all do our part. It doesn't matter what rank you are, or what influence you think you may or may not have. It's just about telling that story, and we can all have our part. Like I said, I am not a subject matter expert. Those are the survivors. I am not law enforcement. I am not a lawyer. I am in the U.S. Army, but these are my own opinions. But I just feel like there's something that we can all do to do our part.
And I think that's basically what it comes down to. I think it's just one, like I always say, right? Like go to the highest level. Being human beings, right? We're having conversations as to what's happening and what's plaguing, for people around us. And to that point, doubling down that this is just awareness. It doesn't constitute, a position of any organization or the other. It's literally saying if we have these conversations, hopefully, like you said, ask the questions. Why don't we talk about this? Is this something that's being offered? What are the ramifications? Let's get the SMEs in here. Let's get those decision makers to have the conversations. But sometimes you have to, show up to at least ask before it becomes something, right? Like the decision makers can't make, decisions without numbers. Well, let's try to talk about stuff until we can start to generate said numbers and hopefully begin to move the needle forward a little bit. So, I think it's very commendable and admirable. Just even you taking the platform to speak up, to be able to at least push the needle forward just a little bit, because again, that's the part thing people realize. Like we talked about earlier before we started recording. It's literally an instance where some folks will figure like, what's the worth? And it's that, what, if everybody pushes the needle just a little bit forward, that's how change happens. It may not happen, because of one person. For all your efforts, you literally just push that up just a little bit. But if after you, somebody else comes and somebody else comes, somebody else comes, look at how far we've come as a whole in so many other areas. We're not where we want to be yet, but we're not where we were. And in this aspect, it's the same exact thing. I think awareness, conversations, and hopefully gain the attention of those that are saying, well, I have something to say. Great. Then time to speak up, because ultimately no one's going to speak up, because it may be like, who's going to pay attention or who cares about it? That's what everybody's saying. So it's like that parable of somebody could have done it, but nobody thought that somebody could have and anybody could have. But at the end of the day, what happened? Nothing.
And I do not want this to end when I hang up my uniform. I mean, I definitely could have said, I don't want my name out there, my face out there, but I don't see, there could always be more speaking up. There are those that are speaking up, but I don't want this to just be a onesie, twosie, unit here, a unit there across branches that are getting trained on this. I would really love to eventually see it where we're including this training to our service members year after year, to get this conversation, because human trafficking, sex trafficking may never be eradicated, but we can always make it better as far as enacting those laws, having policies in place, having resources in place, having people know what to do if they see something. And so, yes, the awareness piece is so important, but I don't want it to stop when I take the uniform off.
I think that's again, that's hopefully what the push of all these conversations are. Two questions I have for you, for those that may be out there listening to this. Speaking up, what would you say to someone who doesn't have maybe the ability to formulate how to speak up about these things? What advice would you give to someone that says, hey, I want to support this, right? Or I want to, help, stop some of this because I may have some personal, insight into what's happening, or I've seen these things happen. What would you say to those individuals that just don't even know kind of where to start to even help or do anything?
Yes, absolutely. Well, I definitely would encourage anybody can reach out to me on LinkedIn, and my name just as it's written there on the screen. And so, one of the things is to check. You can look online at the U.S. State Department, Homeland Security. There's different government agencies that have information out there. Also, to check if there's any local organizations in your community as well. And one of the things I got to bring up about Shared Hope International is that they do have, I do have some books you probably can't see here, but like Invading the Darkness, we have From Congress to the Brothel, and then Renting Lacey. And so these are books by Linda Smith, the founder of Shared Hope International. But one of the things that we also have is The Defenders. And that's really a quest to get men to stand up against pornography. And there's that fine line about, I even talked to service members in uniform about legalization of prostitution. There's mixed on that. Some people say, yes, it should be legalized. Others saying no. So there is this, and then even viewing pornography, that's not a victimless thing to do either. And so just educating yourselves about this, but if you take the pledge to become a defender as a man, that just speaks volumes as well. And you can always sign up for different organizations to get their newsletter where they can educate you. You can become a weekend warrior where you'll get an email that'll send out some flyers that you can post on your social media accounts about human trafficking. But I don't want it to just end, with January. Of course, this is the National Awareness Month for it, but the conversation can go throughout the year, and I highly encourage that, to just get yourself started looking online and having those conversations with the experts in the field.
And I'm just kind of scrolling here because I love the infographic, and again, being able to kind of map and see, like we talked about, how all this kind of comes about. So I think it's a good resource, again, for those that might just want something to at least kind of begin the process. Over at sharedhope.org, you see the various resources that are available from the blog, events that they have, how to take action, like you mentioned, not only activism, but maybe you want to volunteer and step up and do something, becoming a defender, like you mentioned, becoming an ambassador like you are. These resources are out there. You can do the research, take a look at what's out there, and kind of get an understanding of what it may be. Take set pledge to support that. And again, the same things you literally just said are here available at sharedhope.org. When you start looking at the take action section, both from the activism side of the house, see what that's about, and also looking at how to volunteer and step up. Because again, for many individuals, you just don't even know where to start. Like,
you could even contact your local politicians as well.
Yes. So it's a great resource, and I just wanted to kind of just highlight it again. I think it's there's a lot to unpack in this in and of itself, but I think it's good to just set the stage for the conversation. Speak a little bit about kind of, why, you've been an ambassador and passionate about the subject. So sadly, like many things, right, just because it's Awareness Month and we're talking about slavery, human trafficking, it doesn't mean that it just is a January, issue. Right, Breast Cancer Awareness Month is not just subjected to 1 month only, right? So
Right.
It's because we just make a point to focus on it. It doesn't mean the conversation ends. So I think there's something to be said about continuing these conversations. One of the things that I look forward to collaborating in the future, because again, I think this is good as an introduction as to who you are, what you've done. But we had, for example, the Supreme Court. We did a special on their overturning of the statute of limitation for military sexual trauma victims, and we literally had a whole panel. We brought in legal, we brought in a psychologist, a mental health therapist, and 2 military sexual trauma survivor veterans, and talked about it. Because I think sometimes you have to really have a conversation, and the panel that we held was to look at, okay, there has been a change in the law, but let's look at not only the legal aspect of what that means, but the psychological component of what it means. And let's look at what the veteran side of the person who's actually dealing with MST is looking at, and do honor and a service to the conversation. And the same thing I think here, right? Being able to put, bring awareness to this, to hopefully then begin to have panel conversations, bring in the SMEs, bring in the ambassadors, and really have a whole conversation, so that now people get a holistic view. Because every time these conversations happen, what ends up happening is, well, you're not a specialist and you're not this, or you're not well, you know what, let's go ahead and call all the big shots into the conversation. So legal's in the room, psych's in the room, so let's talk about it now. We can put away all the ego and just get down to the fact that these things have to be discussed. And I think that's the power that we have through technology, social media, and being able to have these conversations. So,
and that's what we're doing. You brought up a good point, because it's about working together, but we to also not to not be so arrogant. We need to humble ourselves to not have the savior complex that we need to go kicking down doors and be a vigilante, because the vigilantes just make the work so much harder for that trained professionals. So there is, components, especially with the awareness aspect. But I got to mention Jennifer Foxworthy and Unstoppable You Ministries, because she's actually a 20-year Navy veteran and survivor of domestic violence and author. But her organization also helps survivors of human trafficking as well. And just an incredible human being. So like you said, bringing it to the table, it's all about growing your network too. And I definitely want to expand with my brothers and sisters who are listening on this call today, who want to bring that training to the troops. And I would absolutely love to continue that conversation.
Awesome. So, and again, so I'll just highlight that, you can find Mary on LinkedIn. You look up her name. It's pretty simple nowadays to kind of reach out and connect that. We'll have the links also as part of the broadcast here in the description, as well as the different websites where she's available. We talked about shared hope. We talked about the things she's doing on that side of the house. But overall, I think it's just getting involved in any shape, fashion, or form that you can, and asking the question. I think that's where it all starts, right? Let's just have a general conversation. What exactly is the red sand, right? What are these like? If you just start asking the question, you'd be surprised how things evolve. And I love being able to have this conversation because it's ultimately saying, hey, let's talk about this for a second, right? Enlighten me about what you're doing, why you're doing it, because someone out there who doesn't have the ability to speak to someone who's done what you've done is just going to sit there with a fleeting thought of, well, it'd be nice to get involved, but it just kind of fleets. Whereas now it's like, okay, now you have some context to then hopefully begin to take the next step beyond just a fleeting thought, but taking some action. In closing, I always like to kind of, ask and say kind of what are some parting thoughts that you may have, given the fact that we're dealing with service members, specifically veterans. We may have folks that may be aware of slavery and human trafficking, but they may be also folks that may have had personal experiences through family themselves or whatnot. So there's so many folks that this can affect them in different ways, which is why we've kept the entire time on the top. If this is triggering to you in some shape, fashion, or form, we want to also understand that these conversations, they're not the fun conversations at the time because of the nature of the subject. But if it is triggering, right, these resources are here to just ensure that we're doing justice to the conversation. If you do need to speak to someone, if this does, trigger something that, may be hard for you to process, that's what we have, the banner up on top to be able to say, hey, there are resources here, right, for your own mental health conditions. But in closing, I'll let you kind of close out the last one, but I'll say from my side, I think ask the question, have conversations. I think that's what we need more of nowadays. I think because of the information overload, we tend to forget that we can just have a conversation and talk and ask, right? It's almost cliche to say, well, just Google this, Google that, Google this. And sometimes you just need to have a conversation, right? Genuinely, we know someone's supporting something like Mary is. Ask a question. I can Google this stuff all day, but talk to me a little bit about it. Why are you so passionate about this? If someone's out there doing something that you are interested in, just ask a conversation, because you'd be surprised that a conversation can lead to interest, that can lead to advocacy, that can lead to being a volunteer and potentially making or being the difference that you never thought you would be, that all started with a question about a specific subject. So I would say, we need to communicate and connect more. That's the challenge and the thoughts that I would have. What would be some of your closing thoughts for those out there, Mary?
Yes, I have to circle back and talk about the misinformation aspect. Be very careful about when you're resharing information that's got numbers on it. Make sure that it is coming from legitimate sources and where those numbers are coming from. Equally, like when you're donating to an organization, make sure that they are a legitimate organization that's doing great work. Because equally, where there's good, there's also evil, and just to know that there is something that you can do. And we all suffer, from that chameleon syndrome of not feeling like we're worthy or that we can do enough or we have the degrees or certifications, but there's something that we can all do just for our fellow human being. And so just have, as you said, DP, to have those conversations and know that there's a part that you can play in this fight. Equally, it's all about paying it forward. I just love that expression, to pay it forward. As you, DP, have so generously given me a platform to speak on, and I thank you for that. We can all just keep paying our information with Vets to Industry, with those resources. I'm even a member of Elite Meet, which is for special operations service members in their transition. I would have never known about that had it not been for other service members paying that knowledge forward to me. And so it's just my way of giving back to all of our listeners today, to just know that you are not alone. We've got your six. There's resources available to you. And if you are a survivor that we want your voice heard, we want to give you a platform to speak on. And I welcome and encourage anybody to continue this conversation with me.
Thank you for that, Mary. I have to ask. You said something that I just can't let go, which is for those that are the survivors, for those that are hesitant, right, to speak up. I would hope that, as you listen to this or watch this, wherever you watched it, that you walk away not only with more information, but understanding that what we're trying to do here is provide value and create a space that's safe to have this conversation. Because here's the reality I don't think people realize. It's that it's hard to be that voice to speak up. The people we need to listen from, sadly, sometimes don't feel comfortable taking a position because they don't know where to start. And I think that even us having this conversation hopefully can be shared with someone that says, okay, I would feel comfortable having a conversation, let's say with DP and Mary, because I saw how you guys treated the subject. And I think there's just something to be said there, because if we create a safe space and we show folks saying, hey, look, this is how we want to have a conversation. I think that hopefully begins to make the difference for some who they would like to, but because maybe they're survivors and they've been victims themselves, the last thing they want to do is patronize or parrot it around or not treat it with the dignity I think that they deserve because of what they've endured. So having these conversations, I think, also begin to show how we change the narrative, how we discuss these things, and hopefully someone sees and says, okay, I'll talk to Mary now, because I saw how you treated this. And we kind of almost becomes a living proof of, if you're interested in having this conversation or you feel that you have something to say about this and you want to step up, this is how we honor, our individuals, our people, our community, by being able to give them the ability to speak, by giving them the ability to feel safe, by giving them the ability to see what we will do, because it's what it's about. Because I think once we remove that, more people will be willing to step up. But where can you go without feeling like, will you present me the wrong way, right? Are you going to sit there and just, come at me a whole other way? Because we're military, right? It's like, okay, are you going to come in here and just have a whole joke
Right.
fest? It's going to be dark humor. Are you going to be able to be, sensitive to the subject that we're talking about? And what we see on social media, sadly, we don't see many platforms to give us that. We see a lot of things out there which serve their purpose, but sometimes you need to have a space just to have these conversations that are not the popular ones. They are not the ones you want to just,
Absolutely.
see right now. Like, you have to be in a mental space to be ready to absorb this information. But we endeavor to do that. So that's part of the platform. But when you set that, I think that's just something to call out for those that are out there. If you know someone, or you are someone, sharing this and seeing this, hopefully it does some justice and begins to, mobilize individuals to either join us in this conversation or take the stand and create a similar one for themselves. Because it doesn't matter, how you do it. What matters is that you do it.
And being an active learner, right, DP? Because you probably learn something, I'm sure, from every episode of your podcast, and I just really take pride in being an active learner and continuously wanting to, because every survivor story is so different. They come from all walks of life, men, women, children, and from all over the world, and so that's why I think even as service members, we are sort of forced to work in such a diverse, complex work environment with so many layers to it. But that's why I love the authenticity, the genuinity of everybody's story, and I'm continuously learning. So that's why I definitely continue that conversation.
Yes. So I just want to thank you, one, for your time, your transparency, for standing up, for saying your name. Because again, right, it's easy. OPSEC, I don't want to go out there. I'm just gonna be in the background. But this is how change starts. All right. I've always held that there are those that need to come to the platform and speak up. But until they come and until they show up, we'll hold the line and we'll go ahead and hold the door open, because behind us comes the army. I almost look at this like we're the Advon, right? So it's like, well, first of all, DP, we Mary, what are you guys doing? I'm like, don't get it twisted. This is the advanced party. What's coming behind us will make the change. And it's not in a self-deprecating way. It's understanding that this is how we conduct the business of what we do, right, in the military, right? You don't just full fly in with everything. What comes in first is the first wave. And I look at
Right.
this like, when it comes to these subject, this is the first wave. I'm not the specialist, nor is Mary. We're not the subject matter
Mhm.
experts, but we know that the ones that are come behind us are going to come with the heavy ammunition and the stories and the facts that are needed. But until they show up, we hold the line, because that's how we do this in a team effort, right? Like, let's now go ahead and move to the side and let them do their thing. And that's, I think, the noble way of doing this. So I just want to honor your time and appreciate you for being here and standing up and talking and sharing and just, being part of the advanced party.
Thank you, DP. I really love that. I mean, we definitely all the more tools to our kit bag, but we got that blueprint that's still in development. And we may not have those numbers, but I encourage any leaders out there, any persons of influence that's listening today, that there is something to find ways that you can do to really make that change. Don't depend so much on the numbers. I mean, to me, one is already too many, so
Yes.
we got to do something.
Awesome. We're definitely
Thank you.
this is the first but not the last conversation. I look forward to following your journey and all of the great things that we'll speak about and do in the future. For everyone watching us, thank you for spending this time. Share this, like this. The more awareness we can bring to the subject, the better. Thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us, and
Thank
we
you.
will catch you all on the next episode.